Motorcycle manufacturers don't just come and go, and they never die a quick death. It's always a long, slow, and painful death whereby riders just no longer want to buy their motorcycles anymore. And they can die for many reasons. A poor investment or allocation of their money, poor design choices, leadership problems, market evolution, or just an unwillingness to change. Or sometimes they can die for all of these reasons at the same time. Today we're looking at a time when the single biggest motorcycle manufacturer in the world went from being on top of the world to literally nothing in a matter of just 2 decades. This is the story of the great British marque BSA, how it took over, and ultimately how it fell harder and faster than any motorcycle manufacturer ever. And also we're going to look at where it stands today. Before we do though, I'm guessing many of you are dog people because motorcycle people are cool and dog people are cool. So a lot of you are probably dog people. Our dog is named Norton. Yes, like the old British motorcycle company. I know. Pretty dorky. Now, I don't know about you guys, but we're pretty picky with what food we give to him. Just like I don't want to run my motorcycle on junk oil, I want to think about, what I'm feeding my dog. This is why we've been giving him Sunday for Dogs, which is the sponsor for this video. And it's not just a treat, this is actual food made from 100% human-grade meat, veggies, and superfoods. No synthetic vitamins and no artificial preservatives. And it's air-dried so it stays shelf-stable without the need for a freezer or a refrigerator. Honestly, I was blown away with it when I opened it because it looks like real meat, because it is real meat. And he absolutely loves it. And it's so easy, you can just scoop it right into their bowl. And there's no prep needed, which is so nice because I'm super busy with our 3 kids. So trying to feed our kids and our dog all good quality healthy meals, it's not easy, and this just makes it so simple because it just easily fits right into our busy routine. And I don't have to stress about whether Norton is getting what he needs. It's naturally complete and balanced and vet formulated. So if you guys are looking to upgrade your dog's food, definitely check it out. I've made it easy. You can just click on the link in the description, or you can go to sundayfordogs.com/BART, and you can use code BART to get 50% off your first order. That's 50% off real dog food for your dog. So check it out. Big thanks to Sunday for Dogs for sponsoring this video, and let's jump in. BSA, that is Birmingham Small Arms, was originally a manufacturer of munitions. But something quite odd happened in 1880, something that will feel very foreign to you if you know anything about modern businesses. A man named Frederick Carl Edward Otto walked into BSA's office with this thing, something he was calling a dicycle, like a big wheel, sort of training wheel, giant bicycle thing. And he rode it around on the office tables and down the stairs, and everyone at BSA was so impressed with it that they decided that the future of their company would now be, at least in part, in transportation. BSA would go on to make lots of bicycles, and of course, when motorcycles started becoming a thing, that is basically bicycles with engines strapped to them, BSA wanted in on the fray. Now, early on, BSA was known more for supplying bicycle frames to companies that wanted to build their own motorcycles, but they were one of the earliest companies to start developing and building their own engines. And this would pay off massively, though Triumph would beat BSA to the punch in 1908 with their full first in-house, complete motorcycle. BSA would make their 3.5 horsepower bike in 1910. And this motorcycle really set the standard for production bikes in the early 1900s in Great Britain. BSA did compete in racing at places like the Isle of Man, though they didn't have as much success as some of the other British marques. They were very focused on production motorcycles and making them better and making them more reliable. And this early motorcycle was so good that even by the early 20s, more than a decade later, it hadn't really changed much, at least in terms of styling. Riders were learning that BSA was a company that could be trusted. These were not easy years though. Sure, BSA did really well, but if you think about post-World War I and also Great Depression, Great Britain, this was not an easy time and an easy place to be manufacturing motorcycles. Still, in terms of actual production numbers, they were destroying all of the other British marques that were making bikes at this time, and they would advertise that 1 in 4 motorcycles were BSAs, which was pretty much true. They were making more motorcycles than the rest of the entire British motorcycle industry combined. One of BSA's best innovations at this time, in between World War I and World War II, was a a 50-degree V-twin that was really solid, really reliable, and perfect for sidecar use. It's important to understand how motorcycles were viewed in Great Britain at this time. It's very different than it was here in America. In America, motorcycles have always been viewed as essentially accessories. In Great Britain, for many families and for many people, the economical, smart mode of transportation was motorcycles, and often motorcycles with a sidecar attached to them. And in many ways, BSA's focus on making really quality production motorcycles and not worrying so much about racing made it so that this is how people, viewed motorcycles. To quote another great book by Greg Pullen, which we've referenced him multiple times, this book is on BSA's history. He says, "In the days when cars were almost unspeakably expensive, family motoring did not get better than this. A powerful V-twin with a rugged 3-speed gearbox carried in a well-built, heavyweight frame and hauling a substantial sidecar, complete with luggage compartment and full weather protection." BSAs at this time were really kind of like everyman motorcycles. They were good to look at, they were reliable, they were serviceable, and they made decent power, and people knew of them as just quality machines that, could be trusted. Innovation for BSA at this time wasn't about winning races, it was about making better motorcycles for real people. They were a pioneer in mass production methods at this time in Great Britain, which made it so that they weren't just quality, they were affordable because they were making so many of them. BSA standardized parts across many of their different models, making it so that it was simple and easy to service them. They focused on making less intimidating, smooth-running, quiet engines. Their side valve singles were perfect examples of this. They were just really practical for general use. They also built just a massive, widespread dealership network across Great Britain and across the Commonwealth so that it was simple and easy for people to service their bikes. But when World War II broke out, BSA of course had to pivot their manufacturing to the war efforts. Now they were already experienced in this from World War I, so it was pretty simple for them to retool everything to making munitions and also to focusing on wartime motorcycles. The BSA M20 is really a standout machine from this time. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't fast, but it was basically indestructible. By war's end, BSA had produced over 126,000 M20s, making it one of the most widely used motorcycles in the British Army. These bikes slogged through mud in North Africa, across the freezing fields of Europe, and even in Southeast Asia. BSA was the largest producer of motorcycles during the war, and perhaps more importantly, they were the most trusted. Of course, they also produced guns, famous guns like the Bren gun, and also military bicycles, but it was the M20, rumbling, reliable, and easy to fix, that earned them legendary status among soldiers and mechanics alike. Similar to Harley's WLA, it was really during this time that BSA would become kind of a household name, not just in Great Britain, but across the world. When the dust settled and Great Britain was trying to find its post-war identity, BSA did the same thing. BSA came out of the wartime effort with massive manufacturing capabilities, and so it was time to build motorcycles for peacetime. But this time, they weren't just going to make bikes for transportation, they wanted to make sport bikes. Enter the BSA Goldstar. Introduced in the late 1930s and revived after the war, the Goldstar was a 350cc and 500cc single-cylinder overhead valve beast, and it became an icon. A race bike for the road like never before from a company that was more known for making pedestrian two-wheelers. You had to earn your Goldstar. BSA only gave the name to machines that had lapped Brooklands at over 100 miles per hour. These were not just good-looking motorcycles, they were powerful, they were well-built, and versatile. Clubman racers rode them, trials riders relied on them, and in many ways they were the cafe racer bike. And it wasn't just the Goldstar. BSA launched a slew of popular models, not just singles, but also iconic twins, B31s, A7s, and A10s. These were motorcycles that were fast and fun, but were also practical bikes for people. BSA built out really a post-war lineup of bikes that made motorcycles cool again. Though many British riders would choose BSA, their main market was of course exporting primarily to America, just like Triumph and Norton. But if the Goldstar was kind of like BSA's sport bike, then it was the Bantam that was really almost like their mini moto. Launched in 1948, this was really the motorcycle that got Great Britain going again after the war, almost like, the Vespa in Italy. It was cheap to buy, simple to ride, and easy to fix. What makes the Bantam really interesting is that it wasn't even originally British. The design was based on the German DKW RT-125, a lightweight two-stroke that was seized as war reparations. The Soviets got their own version, and even Harley-Davidson had their own, but it was BSA who turned the design into something distinctly British. The original Bantam had a 125cc two-stroke engine, a rigid frame. It made like 4 horsepower and went about 45 miles per hour tops, but it was still perfect because it was so affordable and well-built and rugged. For decades, this would prove to be the bike that was a first motorcycle for so many British riders. It was used by farmers and postmen and factory workers and teenagers. Some people learned to ride on a Bantam and never bought anything else. BSA sold over 400,000 of these little motorcycles. They were everywhere, and they were really a piece of working class Great Britain at this time. It was very much like the equivalent of the Honda Super Cub before the Super Cub ever existed. Through the early 50s, BSA reached its peak in terms of sales. They were the single largest motorcycle manufacturer in the world, with probably the most diverse lineup of motorcycles in the world. But while BSA had the motorcycling world right there in the palm of its hand, they were laying the groundwork for their own demise. The problem wasn't just the invasion of Japanese motorcycles into really every part of the world, and especially the places where BSA was dominant. It's that BSA failed to change when they needed to. By the late 50s, companies like Honda and Yamaha were producing reliable, smooth, affordable, oil-tight, and even, tech-heavy motorcycles for the public. And slowly, the British bikes began to age, and BSA would be no different. Like so many of the other British motorcycle manufacturers at this time, the problems really started in the boardroom. The people who were running BSA at this time were in complete denial about the reality of their situation, naively believing that, British people would never buy motorcycles from Japan. On top of this, most of the people that were a part of BSA's board were completely clueless to the engineering challenges that BSA was actually facing. Things like their production methods were becoming dated. These people were businessmen and accountants. Most of them weren't motorists. On top of this, as the Japanese and also other European brands like BMW and companies coming out of Italy, as they were growing into all of these markets, BSA found themselves a bloated, overextended company, trying to run multiple overlapping brands all under one very inefficient roof. And so development cycles slowed, quality control dropped, and BSA stayed kind of stuck in its post-war, haven that it had been in. The Rocket 3, which was meant to be BSA's answer to the Honda CB750, arrived way too late, like all of Great Britain's answers to Japan's bikes. It was too heavy, it lacked the refinement and features that the market was demanding. If you've ever ridden an old BSA or Triumph or Norton from, say, the 1960s, and you compare it to even, a Honda or Yamaha from like the early 60s, these motorcycles were decades ahead of the British in terms of just quality, advanced engineering. Their bikes were made so well and they worked so well. A gearbox on one of these motorcycles, even into the 70s, feels like just so behind something like a Honda CB gearbox from the late 60s. Jay Leno likes to mention this quote from one of BSA's old CEOs, and I'm not sure whether this is accurate or who says it, but he says that one of their CEOs mentioned that motorcyclists love nothing more than on a Saturday morning to pull the head off their motorcycle. And he always would say that, no, motorcyclists want to ride. And that couldn't be more true. By the 1970s, the writing was on the wall. BSA's market share was collapsing. Their financials had completely tanked. And in 1973, they officially stopped production of motorcycles. This once grand company was dead, effectively. There was this last-ditch government effort to combine them into Norton Villiers Triumph, but it did nothing and saved nothing. This was pretty shocking. In 1951, BSA sold more motorcycles than anybody else in the world. and just 2 decades later, they were completely dead. But like a lot of great British motorcycle names, BSA didn't stay dead forever. In 2016, the rights to BSA was bought by Mahindra, the Indian industrial giant, through their subsidiary Classic Legends, and their goal was to revive BSA really as a heritage brand, but with modern engineering and global appeal. And in 2021, something pretty crazy happened. BSA returned with an all-new motorcycle, the new BSA Goldstar, unveiled in the UK with a 652cc single-cylinder. It was a retro motorcycle that was meant to sort of bring a lot of the BSA looks into, a more modern package, things like fuel injection and ABS, liquid cooling, Euro 5, all that stuff. And the BSA Goldstar is obviously meant to compete in this growing retro bike market with motorcycles like the Interceptor and Triumph's offerings. The thing is, the motorcycle, I don't think it's really taken off or sold the way that they were hoping. Certainly nothing compared to the scale of like the Interceptor. And BSA hasn't really followed up with more motorcycles. They do have like a scrambler version, but nothing really new or interesting in the 4 years or so since they dropped this bike. With the new BSA, I think it's important to understand that even though they did make a motorcycle that is pretty cool and have, some cool aspects to it, this is nothing compared to the old BSA or where BSA used to be. The companies today that make what BSA was making in the 50s, that is everyman motorcycles and even sport bikes for the general public, but really the companies that are perfecting that sort of commuter production, affordable but quality package are obviously companies like Honda, but I would even say Royal Enfield as well. Not just jumping on a single trend with a single motorcycle, and I really think that's why the new Goldstar hasn't really worked. Also, the styling isn't quite there for me. I do think that the BSA story is a bit of a cautionary tale, especially for the largest, most successful motorcycle manufacturers today. It's easy to assume that motorcycles and their offspring, if they're into motorcycles, that they'll stay loyal to you as long as you have that name and that logo right there on the tank. But that's a misunderstanding of motorcycle riders in general. We want to spend less, and if we can get higher quality at a lower price, we will. And if you as a company can't stay competitive in terms of engineering and also in terms of affordability, we have no problem ditching you. There's no loyalty. Now, I would love to hear from you guys, especially if any of you have owned a BSA before. I personally have always been more into Triumphs, especially classic Triumphs, than BSAs, but I do see why people love them. They seem to be really high quality when they were in their heyday, and beautiful also, and just awesome bikes. So if you have any experiences with them, let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Ride safe.